Hi, everyone. It's Kelvin here from Rival Technologies and Reach3 Insights. Welcome to Outliers. This is our weekly event series that we've created for marketing and research leaders who want to rival the status quo. So every week for the next 10 weeks, we're bringing in thought leaders and research innovators to discover the new techniques and strategies they're using to engage with their customers, get richer insights, and of course, drive better business outcomes. So for week one, we're talking about something that many brands are really trying to figure out right now, and that is how to engage with Gen Zs. So specifically, we are talking about who the Gen Zs are and who are the different subgroups within this cohort that we need to think about. We're talking about the 3 cardinal rules of Gen Z engagement. So what are those principles that we really need to get right if we want to have meaningful conversations with Gen Zs? And of course, we'll get really tactical as well and talk about some do's and don'ts. So we'll cover everything from channel, language and tone, and everything in between. Now, before we get started, I would like to encourage everyone to engage with us throughout this next half hour or so. So please feel free to use the chat feature here on LinkedIn to share your feedback, your thoughts, your questions. And a bit later, actually, we'll invite some of you to turn on your video and ask your question directly to our speakers. Now, speaking of speakers, it's really my absolute pleasure to introduce today's speakers. We really brought out the big guns for week one of this series. We have Jennifer Reid, who is President and Chief Methodologist at Rival Technologies. And we also have Dara St, who is Senior Vice President and one of the founding partners at Reach3 Insights. Jen and Dara, thanks again for doing this on week one. I really appreciate it. To start, let's give everyone a quick intro about the two of you. So why don't you tell us a little bit about what you do at Rival and Reach3, and share about your thoughts or share about your background and insights. Dara, let's start with you.
Okay. Hello, everyone. Thanks for having me, Kelvin. I'm Dara. I'm one of the founding partners at Reach3. I've been on the supplier side of research for over 20 years now, which is kind of crazy, but my love is really the blend of disruptive technology and research. I spend most of my time in retail, CPG, and shopper research. On a personal side, I live outside of Toronto. I'm a mom to 2 Gen Zers. Lucky me, a 16-year-old girl and 18-year-old boy, first year university. So I think I'm kind of in the same boat as you, Jen.
Awesome. Thanks, Dara. I'm Jen, and I'm the President and Chief Methodologist at Rival. I've been in the market research space. I think my first job was at the age of 12, working in the coding department of my father's market research firm. So I feel like I've kind of done all of the different jobs there are to do. My love, I think, as a result of that experience, is really connecting with the participants. I've made my career out of trying to figure out how to get people to come and answer surveys. We can have the best tech and the best questionnaires, but if we don't have the best people answering the questions, then we're not getting the kinds of insights that we want. I spent a lot of my time at Rival working with the customer success team and the vast variety of clients that we have on that team. I live in Vancouver, or just outside of Vancouver, and like Dara, I'm also the mother of Gen Zs. I have 3 of them. One that I have, and I have one of each. In a minute, I'm going to talk about the 3 different groups of Gen Zs. I have one in university, second year university, one in the 12th grade, and one that's still in elementary school.
Great. Thanks, Jen. You forgot to mention your birds and your bunnies.
And I have 2 birds, I have 6 birds, 2 bunnies, and 1 dog. And hopefully everybody will be quiet.
Awesome. Now, before we talk tactics here, I think it's important that we align on definitions a little bit. And Jen, you recently wrote an ebook about Gen Zs. And one of the key points that you made is that it's important to not look at this group as one homogeneous group, right? So I would like for you to kind of expand on that a little bit, talk to us about who exactly Gen Zs are and who are the different subgroups within this cohort.
Yeah, sure thing. Thanks, Calvin. I mean, let's start with the cohort as a whole and then maybe talk a minute about how we sort of break them down. We're working with a North American definition for Gen Z. So that's anyone born between 1997 and 2012. So this is still a fairly young group as a whole. I mean, they're sort of age 9 to 24. But this group makes up about 40% of global consumers. So they are definitely a force to be reckoned with, and more than worthy of our time and attention. I thought it was interesting. I was looking this morning, they are one of the most diverse, or they are the most diverse generation in the United States. So 48% of them are racial or ethnic minorities. And that compares to, if you think about boomers, another, obviously a huge generation, only 18% of boomers in the US were minorities, or about 39% of millennials. And I'm forced to say, I have to give you the stats on Gen X. Dara and I are both Gen X moms to Gen Z kids. And so even though nobody cares, the number was about 30% for Gen X. So that number is growing. And as a result of that, we see that diversity and inclusion is the number one issue that this generation cares about. When you ask them, what are the sort of the issues that face the world today? What do you care most about? Certainly diversity and inclusion is number one, and climate change is, right on its heels for number two. Whereas we saw millennials were more climate change drivers. We've seen kind of the weight of the world lives on the shoulders of these kids for sure. We want to remember that they grew up with tech. These are kids that had smartphones at 10. My daughter, who's 9, doesn't know of a time in which she couldn't just FaceTime her grandma on command. The only marketing they know is one-to-one, and everything is on demand for them. Music is on demand, film is on demand. And so they have an expectation of personalization. But I do want to just quickly say that they aren't necessarily one homogeneous group. And when I work with brands that are trying to engage with Gen Zs, we always try to sort of understand which of the groups they were really specifically talking about. Because of course, 9 to 13-year-olds are in elementary and middle school. They're still at a phase in their lives where they're very dependent on their parents. They certainly are making and driving purchase decisions, but they generally don't have their own money or their own jobs quite yet. And also, we have to go through their parents to talk to them if we want to talk to them going forward. The 14 to 18-year-olds are in high school. They're getting their first jobs. Their sort of notion of consumerism is really starting to grow. And really, for many of them, they don't have the weight of rent or post-secondary education to pay for. And so they can be a little bit more extravagant in their spending. And they're starting to really become aware of brands and what brands they like. And then the last group are sort of the 19 to 24-year-olds. They're sort of in college or post-secondary. They might be having their first full-time jobs. So now they have the sort of same weights that we all did when we were that age, in terms of having to live inside of a budget maybe for the first time, and so it does impact their purchasing decisions. I will just quickly note that I feel like this older group bleeds into young millennials, and if you do read the ebook, you'll see that actually we talked about young millennials sort of as part of this cohort, because that whenever the generations get close together, it's a little bit blurry on the edges.
Yeah, great. Thanks for the overview. Now, in your ebook as well, you talk about the 3 rules of youth engagement. And obviously these rules are interlinked, they're very related, but they're also distinct. So can you just give us a quick overview of those 3 rules?
Yeah, sure thing. And I'll do it quick so that Dara can give us some tactical examples. But, for me, the 3 rules are transparency, authenticity, and trust. So transparency is being clear about who you are, what the purpose is of an engagement, what you stand for, right? So we see that research shows that Gen Zs, 79% of Gen Zs think brands are never honest. I mean, that's a pretty crazy stat. And I think that part of how we help break through that is through being transparent. The second one is authenticity, and that's about living up to what you stand for and avoiding being fake. We see this in Gen Zs who like to see advertising with real people in them. And this carries through into research. We're going to give you some examples of that as well. And I think that transparency plus authenticity together gives us trust. And that's what we build when we're successful of both things. And what we found is that this cohort, they want to share their feedback, but they won't do it if they don't trust you. And we have to be willing to invest a little bit in building that trust with our participants in order to have the most successful research.
Yeah, I love these rules, Jen, because even if we kind of not think about market research or marketing just for a second, if you're trying to build a relationship with someone, like these are the 3 rules that you need to live by. So definitely great principles here. Now, Dara, I want to make this a little bit more tangible for people. And so can you share some thoughts on how we could apply these principles when designing or conducting research?
Yeah, for sure. Okay. So like when we think about the principles in design of a questionnaire, we like to call them, like at Reach3, conversational design principles. And it's definitely important. And it's really where I see this strong partnership between Rival and Reach3 come together. So we like to call them, first of all, we like to call them chats. So it's all about like keeping it simple, keeping it fun, but at the same time being very clear about the purpose of the research. So Jen was talking about, you know, the purpose and being entrusting. So it's really important for everyone, obviously, to understand the purpose of research, but it's very important specifically for Gen Z. More and more, we're hearing back from clients that although these chats, they feel like they might be, you know, fun, that they're really getting depth in terms of the results of it as well. So definitely in terms of the conversational design, we want to have that purpose built in. And then the second one would be tone. So tone is another design principle that's really important. You want to make sure you're using the appropriate tone. So sometimes this can be hard because you really don't want to come across as like trying too hard, because you know that will be a total complete fail. It's kind of like, you know, hashtag dad jokes. Try not to try too hard. So tone can vary, definitely study to study. You know, it depends on the product or the objectives of the research. So it doesn't have to have the same tone every time, but it, you know, kind of make it fit with what you're trying to do. Just don't be clinical. There's so many studies out there these days that are super clinical, feels like it's test taking. Just go with simple language. And then I guess the last one is videos. So they help, they definitely help, and is something that we would consider one of our conversational design principles. They can be used in 2 ways. So when a video is incorporated into the chat, this can help with engagement. It gets across like the right tone. It helps to build that trust as well. And it makes the Gen Z feel like they're connecting like with a real company. And then the other side is when participants are asked to leave a video. So you think about it, it's like you're essentially mimicking the digital style that they're used to. So talk to text, video selfies. This really helps to build a connection. And they tend to leave deeper, more authentic answers. So for example, a recent study we conducted on the Rival platform, this was among young Gen Zers, and it was an in-home use test where participants were asked to try a new feminine hygiene product, to something a little bit more sensitive in nature. And we asked them to provide feedback, and they gave some very thoughtful, authentic answers in the moment. And, you know, I really don't think we would get that from an email survey. So I think the more and more the principles, I guess, just to kind of relay them back, just be clear on the purpose, have the appropriate tone, use simple language as much as possible, and use videos both for relaying information as well as collecting thoughts, because that's how we're going to get to the deeper, richer insights.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, great tips there. And, you know, in terms of videos, we can probably sit here all day talking about videos. But I know, Jen, you have a good story to share about this one, right?
Yeah, I mean, we have had the pleasure of helping a new brand called the House of LR&C launch over the last sort of 1.5 to 2 years. And one of the challenges that we had when we built that community was that we couldn't tell, it was a Gen Z community. We couldn't tell the members who the brand was, because that was the whole point, was that we were building out the brand. And so we sort of teased them. We were as transparent as we could be, like, this is a new brand. This is what the brand stands for. And there's some celebrity backers, and we'll let you know who those celebrity backers are right before the brand actually launches. And it turned out the House of LR&C is owned by Russell Wilson and Sierra. And we were able to actually have Russell and Sierra film a video speaking directly to the community. And before the brand launched, we could send that to them, so that they actually got that level of transparency and really helped us launch forward into that community and what it needed sort of post launch. And I think is a really good example of how we've used video. And you don't have to have, sort of fancy celebrities. Our clients do that all the time, whether it's, from inside the offices of Dell, or in their homes, like we all have been this year.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that example because it really humanizes research, and I think it taps into the intrinsic motivation of people to share, right? Like if they know that there's someone there listening to their feedback. Is there anything else with respect to the research engagement as a whole that you want to share?
I guess I would just say, like any research you do, you need to put yourself in their shoes, right? So think about the context of where they are. A lot of times we do with conversational communities, the recruitment for these kinds of studies will be through social media. So launching into something like their personal demo questions right up front might not be the best plan, because all of these kids or Gen Zers have been encouraged to not share their personal information online. So I think let's just be careful about when we're asking for personal information. Do we need that personal information? That kind of thing. That would be one area that I think is worth talking about a little bit more. The other is incentives. So it's important to close the circle on share backs and things that you can share back with the group. Incentives, and especially though, if it's a draw, just tell them who won. Show a picture if you can, whatever. It really helps to build that trust. And ultimately you want to be able to engage them again and again. The Rival platform allows you to do smaller studies and iterate kind of over and over, like iterate with them. So you're building that information over time. So you don't need to have long surveys, but it's really about engaging them over time and giving back to them. And then the last one is just around, it's quite important to actually get a Gen Z to look at your chat or your questionnaire, if you want to call it that. But you don't want to be coming across as trying too hard. It's better yet, get them to help you actually have some input, write parts of the chat for you. I can think of a recent example. We did a study on responsible beauty among Gen Z, and we actually had some input from Gen Z, and it really helped. We were able to bring in celebrity TikTokers, some niche brands. And I think that really allowed us to get to establish a deeper connection. And so we were given back deeper answers. And so while it might sound weird, but it's true, I think, it allows you to really create this friendly connection, and they can be very forthcoming that way. So I think those are the ones that I would probably just suggest, Kelvin.
Yeah, absolutely. And it just reminds me of Jen's examples of like testing chats with her kids. So
yes.
A lot of firing my phone into the back on the way to high school in the morning. Okay, please do this chat and let me know what you think.
Yeah, sure.
So Jen, shifting gears here a little bit, we mentioned authenticity. One of the benefits of really talking to these young people is that if you do it the right way, you get authentic feedback. And it's interesting because in the past year alone, for example, many brands have been trying to talk to to Gen Zs about very sensitive and touchy subjects, sometimes polarizing subjects. Maybe if you have any stories or thoughts to share regarding what these brands are doing well and how they're getting candid feedback from young people.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I would say that this is a very smart generation. They want to talk about topics. They have access to a lot of information at their fingertips, and in a way that other generations haven't. And so they're very open to the conversation when you do it right. They just lost my example there for a second. I have actually a couple of examples, but just in the let's talk about Viacom. So Viacom did some work during the election last year, during the US presidential election last year, and wanted to talk about the election, how people were feeling. They were sort of less cared about who you're going to vote for and cared more about, how is the media around the election affecting you? And our client Dana loves to tell the story that, one of the questions that they asked was, going to vote. When you think about going to vote, and if you think about it being like a trip, what kind of trip is it? Is it a road trip? Is it a trip to the dentist? Is it an acid trip? And we really got a lot of great and fun responses from that. And we're really able to build an interesting landscape about how Gen Zs felt about the election going into it. Our data analyst that ran that data for me has worked for our family for, I don't know, 30, 40 years. And her response was that it was the best election survey she'd ever seen, which is high praise coming from her. We also saw it in early COVID, where we were chatting with a lot of young people about how COVID was impacting them, and really just the videos and their willingness to get on video and talk about the fact that, remember, these are people who would be, many of them, employed in restaurants, in retail, in the jobs that very much closed down at the beginning of COVID. And they were talking about losing their jobs and what it meant to them and having to move back home with their parents, and really very heartfelt, meaningful videos. And so this crew will definitely talk to you when you do it properly.
Great. Thanks, Jen. We'll open it up to Q&A pretty shortly here. People are a bit shy in submitting questions here, but Dara, maybe just to close out before the Q&A, can you share some don'ts? So what are some of the things that we absolutely must avoid?
Okay, yeah, sure. Because I definitely want to hear some questions. So I guess the top don'ts, a lot of them are just the opposite of the do's, but long surveys. Let's think about how this age cohort engages digitally with friends and family. You're trying to mimic this as much as possible. So long surveys are a definite don't do it. Again, the platform allows you to iterate. So that's one biggie. Don't try too hard or be too cute. They'll know. And with that, don't pretend to be a Gen Zer when you're not. And don't talk down to them, because I can tell you, even as a mom of a Gen Zer, that's the fastest way for them to shut you down or shut down immediately and not want to engage and be a part of it. So I think the last part would be about email. Text as much as possible. Email's kind of is dying. So we know that kids under 24, they're not using email to communicate. So as much as possible, start to use text, and kind of we've been doing this for a couple of years now, and come with us to the modern age. So yeah, let's get going. That's all I got.
Okay, cool. Now everyone, if you have any questions, please feel free to leave them in the chat. Would love to hear from you. While we're waiting, I have a couple of questions here. Jen, I know you have very strong opinions about emojis. So can you share them with us?
I mean, I love an emoji, don't get me wrong, but then I'm not a Gen Z. I think that sometimes we think that emojis is the way that sort of it's sort of an example of how you can get too cute. So I often will use some emojis, but it's to be used liberally. It's like a, spicy cayenne. A little bit is great. Too much is not so great. And it is one of the ways that if I get a little carried away with emojis and I pass the phone into the back of the car, that's when one of my kids will tell me, this chat sounds like it was written by an old person trying to pretending to be a young person, mom. And that is never, that's never the feedback that I want.
And just to build on that a little bit, like with GIF or GIFs as well, it's if you're doing a global study, you got to test those out a little bit too. Use some friends and family, do some soft launches, because that can also fall very flat in some other markets where you think it works maybe in North America, might not work in China.
Yeah, fair, definitely fair.
Thanks. Okay, I also got a question beforehand from Kelvin here. It says, any particular sensitivities to be aware of when building a survey, collecting data, and reporting info on Gen Z, since some of them could be under 18?
Yeah, so we're sort of okay in the sort of 14 to 18-year-old group. Obviously, you want to be conscious that you're, not, if you're going to delve into something really, really sensitive, that it's being set up properly and there's lots of good outs. But you can go ahead and speak directly to 14 to 18-year-olds, no problem. Once you're below 14, then you do have to be quite conscious of going through their parents in order to speak with them. And that is how That's how we manage it. And we also are very conscious, no matter who we're talking to, about what we do with PII, how our security works. And that's certainly important with young people as well. We have one community that uses their videos, for example, and it works beautifully. They collect videos through chatting about different topics, and then they'll use those videos in their TikTok, which is great. But we have to make sure that we are going through the steps of getting the right kinds of consent, properly signed off before we're using young people's videos in a public fashion.
Anything to add?
I was just going to say, like, for one of our clients, like a large mass retailer, doing some of the seasonal work around like back to school, just making sure you have the right permissions to be, sharing that video, both internally for research purposes and if so, more broadly if needed. So definitely permission based, but a lot of opportunity to engage Gen Z.
Perfect. Thanks. Now we have a question actually, and she happens to be a Gen Z, Fiora.
Yeah. So you guys mentioned that long surveys are a big don't. So I was wondering how long you guys recommend the chats to be when you're engaging with Gen Zs.
I think it's not, I get asked this question a lot, like how long is too long? And it depends a little bit on the context. So if you're going to bump into somebody's day in the middle of their day, right? Like I always say, when you're doing, you have to remember that while all this is important to you and it is your full-time job and it's probably your client's full-time job, and it's the thing you think about all the time. So obviously you're going to make time for it, but somebody walking down the street, you're going to just sort of jump into their day. So I think if you're kind of crossing somebody at that moment, it's about 5 minutes. And 5 minutes, it depends on whether there's video, what kind of answers there are, might be as few as 10 questions, might be as many as 25 questions, but it's pretty snappy. On the other hand, and I'll let Dara jump in, if you are within the context of an event or an activity where it makes sense to be giving feedback, I think you can get away with something a little bit longer because you're hitting in the right context relative to what it is they're doing, though not a whole lot longer. Dara?
Yeah, I'll give you an example. So this weekend, we worked at an event in Vegas, and it was a music festival, and it was event evaluation. So tons of Gen Zs who haven't been to a concert in probably, 12 to 18 months. So lots of excitement. The chat was around 10 questions. So, definitely in that like 5-minute range at most. And, but the sentiment, the experience, the videos that they gave us to capture that event where it was unreal. So yeah, anywhere in that 7-minute mark is kind of where we would play. The other thing I would just say is that the ability, when I say you can iterate with them, it's very easy for you to get them at the end of the chat, say, do you want to continue chatting after the concert or the next day? A lot of times, very high response rates for that. So it's very easy just to text them again and to get the more feedback that way too.
Absolutely.
Okay, great. I think this might be the last question unless someone asks a question in the next minute or so. But again, from Kelvin, how do I survey Gen Zs if I don't have access to them?
Yeah, it's obviously a tricky question and something that I spent a lot of time trying to help figure out. You have to kind of go where they are. I mean, I always tell the story about how my son almost screwed up his first year of university because it didn't occur to him to check his email. Email is really not it. So therefore, social media really is it. And so we often work with our brands to say, like, young people are already engaged with you likely on social media. It's a good place to start within your own social media pages. And then from there, we can advertise using social media. We are spending a lot of time right now trying to break through recruiting on something like TikTok, which is where we're going to find Gen Zs, as opposed to, obviously we're not recruiting Gen Zs off of Facebook, but certainly Instagram remains a place that we can recruit people, at least for now.
Yeah.
Are there any other?
Like again, just echoing what you're saying, Jen, is like, be where they are. So if they're at the event, it's text music to a certain phone number that comes straight into the chat. You got an influencer there. have them come in through that way. So post something, click on it, come in, QR codes, lots of paths in, just kind of be where they are, use the language that they use, and there's going to be a lot of opportunity to engage them. And
I think one of the greatest gifts that COVID has given the market research industry is the fact that everybody knows how to use a QR code now, because that QR code is very powerful for launching some questions within the context that somebody is in.
Yeah. Excellent. Okay, we're actually at time, so this is perfect. So I think we do have one question from Gabby here. How many times or how often do you recommend re-engaging Gen Zs?
Dara?
Okay, so it kind of depends on the engagement. A lot of times what many of our clients do are set up what's called a conversational community, and that can be a conversational community of Gen Zs. And so we, as long as we're upfront about the engagement, we want to talk to them once a week for over the course of 6 months or a year, then they're more likely to again, know the purpose, know what they're doing. So as long as we're upfront about that, Gen Zs are very forthcoming. They're able to participate many times. Do you have anything, Jen, to add?
Nope, that sounds good to me.
Okay, thanks, Gabby. Okay, I think we'll leave it at that. Just 3 takeaways that I heard today. I think importance of transparency. So Jen really mentioned about the importance of saying who you are and why you're doing the research. Importance of authenticity. So I love Dara's example of getting a Gen Z to potentially write the chat or the survey. And then I like this concept of transparency plus authenticity equals trust. I think that's really powerful. So, we encourage you guys as well to share your takeaways, either on LinkedIn, Twitter, and tag Reach3 and Rival. And hopefully you guys can also join us next week when we bring in Matt Kleinschmidt, CEO and founder of Reach3 Insights, and Ben Hudson, head of marketing at Rival Group, to talk about how to keep your new COVID customers. So Perfect. That's it for this week. Thanks again, everyone.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.
Thanks, Dara. Thanks, Jen.
Thank you.